openness is the participatory culture. The participatory culture is an interesting word because it contains culture. Now, what's culture? It's not going to a museum looking at old paintings. Culture is that which we all in society create, and culture changes over time. The participatory culture is a movement that changes society through culture. However, it's not new. Eric von Hippel started writing books in the 70s about where innovation comes from. Open innovation, democratizing innovation. And I'm not sure whether he was just right there at the right point in time or if everybody read his books, because consumer involvement in product development started to rise in the 70s as well. So we at companies are not talking about consumers. And we're no longer talking about customers. We're talking about colleagues. Because in a world of openness, we're just the ones doing part of this. There's a lot of people outside the company doing a lot of it. And they are colleagues. In the old world, we sat down, you can see this as the big 5 mobile companies, and said, we know kind of what the consumer wants, and we're gonna create that. And we did so. We did it all a bit differently, and once the products got into the market, they might not fit that well together. And we had some angry customers. At one point in time, you could send a picture message between a Sony Ericsson and a Nokia Mobile. Innovation is always the same thing as differentiation, is always the same thing as fragmentation. But we usually describe a few of these words as negative and a few as positive, so how can that be? The number one purchase reason when people want to buy a new mobile is brand. The next most important purchase decision is made upon design. That's where we want to differentiate. I don't want my brand to be the same as someone else. I don't want the industrial design to be exactly like someone else. But after that, it starts to get a bit problematic. Now, we could innovate in services and software and write something that we believe is the best thing ever. But at the same time, we would be fragmenting the market. Let's say I create the world's best development environment and language. It is the world's best development environment and language. But if no one else uses it, there's no point. That's why it's bad to fragment, even though it would be innovation. Now, we tried to solve the problem of fragmentation by going standardization. And standardization is absolutely lovely if you like to fly and write a lot of text. However, it did not solve the consumer problem. It still created incompatible things because you can read a specification in many different ways. So the solution, of course, that's why I'm standing here, is open source. If we create the components once, and we do not say, this is my component, I own it, and it's the best component I could ever make, which is cooperate. We can create something bigger, something larger, a system that actually fits together. And here's where magic happens. When the things fit together, they actually work. And we get happy consumers that like to use the products. So that's easy, let's just do everything open source, no problems there, right? Well, there are motives behind creating open source, and they go beyond pizza. There are extrinsic and there's intrinsic motives, and this is just one of the papers that you can find on this. Some developers work in the gift economy, they work for social status. Some feel they want to better the world. It all boils down to, you can't control them. Now, a lot of open source is written by developers working in large companies, those you could control. Others don't, and those are really important. They might end up writing support for more CPU cores in the Linux kernel instead of giving us full-screen, smooth-playing Flash, as this XKCD comic details. Open source is run as a meritocracy. If you're good, your stuff will get used. If you're not, well, why should it? It sounds easy enough. That's not the way standardization was run. That's not the way big companies develop. In a meritocracy, things start to get eerily similar to Darwin's survival of the fittest. I love this. I love working in a fit company. But for many, this is really, really scary. When people get scared, their lizard brain kicks in. Seth Godin likes to talk about the lizard brain. He's talking about the amygdala. The natural reaction to everything new, and this comes from biology, is to say no. Because the new could be dangerous. We know the old, it's probably not dangerous. In the world we're living in, back to exponential development and rate of innovation doubling, the new is most likely the best thing, not the old. So a lot of us, me and you included, need to take care. We need to make sure that we're not saying no because we're scared, even though it's a biological reaction that is pretty hard to control. So what's the old then? I have a confession to make. My first higher education was as a mechanical engineer in the process industry. I designed factories. They are old. My next higher education was as a software engineer trying to claim... I actually fit right in. Trying to claim that software development was a mechanical engineering thingy and that you could control it in the same way and that all developers were like interchangeable cogs in a machinery. It's bollocks, it's not true. I wasted a few years in that education. So the factory's gone. It is. Factory is a big process where you put stuff in on one side, stuff happens and you don't really need to know about it, and out comes perfect things. It does not work that way. It does not, that world has changed. And it's changed into weird-looking animals. No, really. There's a book called The Starfish and the Spider, and I wholeheartedly recommend you to read it. It details the difference between the old way of doing things, which is like a spider. You've got a central nervous system, a head that is in control, and if you cut off the head, or if you separate kind of the legs from the head, nothing will happen. That's the factory. The other way is a starfish. It's got a distributed nervous system. And we recently heard someone talk about it, self-organizing teams without leaders. That's the starfish methodology. If you can get a common vision through a number of artists, because that is the true word for designers and developers today. If you can get them on your vision, and you should be able to, because that means you have a good vision, you don't need to control them. You don't need to stand there saying, this is what you do, follow the process. The flip side, dependent on your position, is that when you're dealing with artists, you need to make sure you can retain them, and they're the ones running your company. They're right-brainers. There's been a rise in right-brainism in society. For 15,000 years, society was left hemisphere. Logic, run by men. Since the 1970s and 80s, that's changing, and people are more using their right hemisphere. This is from A Whole New Mind, a great book by Daniel H. Pink. There's a correlation between that consumer involvement and the rise of innovation.